As always, this video may contain topics that some viewers may consider to be sensitive, and viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a true story you want to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. Upon curiosity, I was stumbling upon Google Maps checking in on places that I've been before. For some reason, I decided to check out the childhood home that I have lived in for 11 years. I observed the Google Street View in the back alley of this bi-level home in northeast Edmonton. I encountered what appears to be a ghostly face peering out of the window in the master bedroom. I immediately took a screenshot and I sent the picture to my father, who later shared the photo with the family. Over a family gathering, my father discussed the time before I was born that he heard what sounded like an animalistic growl coming from the TV. The TV, however, was not turned on. And throughout the time being in the house, we didn't own any dogs or cats. Adding to the fact that this happened in the middle of the night. Nobody was active outside during that time. When speaking to my dad regarding the past house and its history behind it, he recalled a man who died of cancer who lived in the house. The widow he bought the house off of exclaimed that it was unknown if her husband died in the house or not. My dad also told me that the widow stated her husband liked to be in the basement. There was a specific area in the basement that I despised going in. The laundry room hallway. You could chalk it up to child imagination or child fears, but that part of the basement was always dark, and you would feel like you would get jumped in that area. The door to that area refused to close. I recall closing it a few times, only for it to open 5 to 15 minutes later. This was creepy in my little mind, but this was not why the entity was considered negative. Before this is chalked up to temperature changes, this door opening happened regardless of the season or time of day. There was a time when I was about 2 or 3 years old and was heading off to bed. In my overactive child brain, I couldn't fall asleep. The current thunderstorm we were having didn't help either. I recall the back of the bed lifting above the ground, but when I noticed, the bed went down as if nothing had happened. I didn't have any siblings, nor was it humanly possible for anyone to be right behind the bed, as it was right up against the wall. This terrified me as a child, and I ran out of my room to my parents, who promptly told me to go to bed. This was the start of many things to come in that home. During the nights, it appeared that I could get attacked by some unseen force that didn't like me. I recall having sleep paralysis, as often I would feel a heavy weight on me. However, there was nothing in my room that was unusual. These events were often a bad omen. I recall that when this sleep paralysis happened, it would lead me to have a bad day. There were also times that I would vomit as a result of this incident. Telling this to my father, he told me he should have done something after he heard the growl years back. The bizarre events during the night often led me to have odd dreams and wake up at odd points of the night. I would often feel like being watched during the night or waking up at 1 to 3 in the morning and hearing the TV on, or a whispering conversation. It sounded like whispering between two people. As a child, I was fascinated by this conversation until I opened the door and heard nothing. Even as a child, I knew that something was off about the voices, but I didn't want to bother my parents at that odd hour of the night. As my childhood progressed, the activity seemed to as well. I recall a moment where my Xbox turned on during the night, and then I checked the next morning to see it turned off, which baffled me as a child because I recalled shutting it off and playing with my Legos shortly after. Another event that followed shortly happened when I was brushing my teeth. I recalled seeing a figure through the mirror walking towards my dad's bedroom with a top hat and a nice suit. Even though he was translucent, like a cloud, you could distinctively see that this was a man in a top hat and a suit that looked close to being human. Then, 11 months later, while I was on my dad's computer, I saw the same man walk down the same hallway and nothing happened. A few days after my first encounter with the man was a night that I will never forget. That night, I saw what looked like a shadow face peering in through the window. Even though I knew that that was unrealistic, as you'd have to be insanely tall to peer in, or at the very least require a ladder, which you would have heard if someone did that. Plus, why would it move back the moment that I saw it? Around the same period, my neighbor's dog, Harry, reacted negatively to something when I went out. He growled while staring at something, even showing his teeth. At the time, I didn't understand why Harry was behaving out of character. If one were to be around Harry, one could point out that he was docile to the point that he would never react to anything. After a couple days of this, Harry was back to his old docile self. Could Harry have seen something that I was not able to see or sense? Possibly something malicious that had intent to harm me, causing Harry to want to scare off whatever was intending to do this? Well, despite Harry's heroic efforts, this did not stop the ongoing activity in the house. Whatever lived there definitely was not photogenic, as there are no photos of whatever entity lived in that house. I recall hearing the door to the first floor opening on its own while watching Avatar: The Last Airbender on TV. Observing the door open on its own in such a manner that it appeared as if someone was wanting to sneak out, I went to the area where the door opened, realizing it was unusually cold, like easily a few degrees colder than the room that I had just stepped out from. Whenever I was alone, there was not one moment in that house at this point where I did not feel like I was being watched, especially if I was in the living room or the basement. To a child, this is creepy. I often played video games, not only because it was entertaining, but to distract me from feeling this way. I felt that by doing this, I wouldn't feel this entity. While discussing this with my dad, he questioned if his rage moments were from the entity's influence. Could I have been under the influence of some negative entity residing at that place? When thinking of the paranormal, having periods of inactivity is considered normal. It is common to have periods of inactivity as entities require energy to be active. If people say that paranormal activity occurs daily, they're likely fabricating the whole series of events. Unless you have provoked an entity, you will not be subject to frequent activity. As anticlimactic as it sounds, that's how paranormal activity works. However, once it's there, it often happens in brief moments. Even during periods of inactivity, I could feel like I was not alone, yet no further activity would occur. Periods of inactivity could go on for months at a time. However, the paranormal occurrences would happen whenever something negative happened. It could have been something as simple as having a rough day at school. The activity would happen and then stop a couple of weeks later. For example, I recall putting my toy cars in a line and leaving it as I had to go to bed. I woke up and headed downstairs to continue to play with my cars and saw that they were in a large pile. I don't recall ever going downstairs and playing with my toy cars during the night. I promptly asked my father to see if he moved them. When I got no as the answer, I was able to determine no logical explanation. There was one time in the night where I desperately had to use the bathroom. I went out of my bedroom to use the nearest bathroom. When I was heading to the bathroom, I noticed light emanating from the bottom of the doorframe. I assumed someone was in there, so I waited about 5 to 10 minutes. By that time, I really had to go. Once again, I checked into that very bathroom to be in use. Impatiently, I went downstairs and used the other bathroom. When I went back upstairs, I noticed the upstairs bathroom was unoccupied. I couldn't hear anyone leave the bathroom, nor did anyone see me go up or down the stairs. Assuming nothing of it, I went back into my room and tried to drift back off to sleep. A few minutes later, my father came in to check on me. I lied and said I was sleepwalking instead of using the bathroom downstairs. I can't conclude if this was paranormal or not, since my sick mother was in the house at the time, which made me unsure if it was her or not. Though, upon talking to my father, he didn't recall her using the bathroom at that time. The house also made some noises that I cannot explain. I've been in other homes, and I've spent the night there with my family, and I didn't hear any noises from the pipes. Both older and newer homes did not replicate the same noise, or have any noise per se, which baffled me. The noises sounded like banging on hollow pipes, or something metallic. Now I'm well aware that this could be something with the house, and I would agree. You can't conclude something as paranormal as that type of hollow metal banging. I only bring it up because it only happened in this house, and not the other houses that I've been in before. For now, I'll call this normal house noise, unless I get further evidence regarding what the noises were. The banging, oddly enough, only happened when the heater or conditioner was inactive, and occasionally sounded like someone was moving in the pipes. However, these pipes were so narrow that nobody could ever fit in them. I always chalked it up to normal house noise, as that was the only logical explanation behind it. Maybe it was indeed normal house noises, or maybe it was paranormal. Eventually, I moved out of that house. Since I moved, almost 9 years ago, it's gone through quite a few occupants. The changes in the occupants piqued my curiosity, as I wondered if the occupants before encountered anything paranormal. I don't believe that I should be bothering the current owners with frivolous requests and questions. However, if I notice any social media post regarding that house and its haunted activities, I will gladly share my story with whomever posts it. Perhaps Edmonton could be more haunted than we realize. I can confirm that whatever was in that house has definitely sparked my interest in the paranormal. This true story is about my first encounter with a shadow entity that haunted me for several years in my childhood home. This encounter happened a few years after my first experience, where I heard a woman's voice calling my name. It had been a couple years since my father passed. My mom had started dating a man that she met at church that would soon become my stepfather. It was a warm, summer Sunday night, and I was home alone as I didn't want to go to the evening church service. I loved Sunday night TV, and I was watching my favorite shows. I was hungry and went to the kitchen to get a snack. I could easily see the TV from the kitchen table, as our home had an open floor plan. Everything was good, and I was enjoying the shows and having my snacks at the kitchen table. Then, the lights flickered and dimmed. It wasn't uncommon during this era to have brownouts in this area of South Carolina. This time was different, though. The atmosphere in the house became heavy, dark, and evil. It got really cold, and I was immediately weirded out. The lights flickered for a minute or two and then went back to normal. Okay, weird. And I did feel uneasy. I remember losing focus on the TV and being hyper aware of something or someone being with me. I tried to brush it off and continue to watch TV, but I could barely focus on it. A few seconds later, I saw this shadow figure out of my peripheral moving around the entrance of the hallway to the right, and a door directly in front of me that looked into an unlit, dark, formal room. The hallway went to the back of the house where the bedrooms were. I'm spooked out big time, but I hesitantly go to investigate this shadow figure. I looked down the long hallway, formal room, and bedrooms. There was nothing there. There shouldn't and couldn't have been anyone else in the house anyways. They would have had to have entered through the back door located behind the den, through the mudroom, and past my line of sight. It couldn't have entered through the front door in the formal room. It was an oversized, heavy, solid wood door secured by a bolt lock and difficult to open due to the frame's swelling from the humidity. This door made a lot of noise when simply unlocking the bolt, and definitely when opening it. We rarely used it. So, it was not possible that someone entered the house without being seen or heard. I'm very spooked and uneasy, but I try to convince myself that it was just a flicker of the power and that I was imagining the shadow figure. I'd lost my appetite and went back into the den, leaving my food on the table, and started trying to watch TV. That heavy feeling had not left the house, but I tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away. A few minutes later, I saw the shadow standing to my left in the kitchen out of the corner of my eye. As I turned to look at it, it slowly faded. So I'm now frozen with fear. The lights dim again, and I hear a scraping noise from the outside of the house, which sounds like someone dragging a rake or something metal down the brick exterior walls. I noped right out of my house immediately and ran into my neighbor's backyard. I'm scared to be inside or outside of my house at that point. I'm terrified more than I ever have been in my entire life. I don't feel safe in the neighbor's yard either, but I'm a few 100 feet away from my house. My neighbors aren't home and their house is completely dark. From where I'm standing, I can see into the den through the large picture window. The room is lit by one lamp and I can see shadows moving about. At one point, I saw the shadow watching me through the window. This lasted for several seconds that seemed like an eternity. It wasn't shaped like a person, but more like a tall, dark void of empty nothing. Around 3 foot wide and over 6 foot tall. It went beyond the top of the window that was 3 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and the top was 6 feet off the floor. This entity did not feel friendly. It felt angry and hostile. It oddly felt familiar, though. A minute later, I see headlights coming down the driveway. It's my mom and stepfather-to-be. A sense of relief came over me and that heavy feeling dissipated. Almost immediately, the shadow disappeared and everything went back to normal. My mom sees me in the neighbor's yard and is immediately upset that I'm outside. I incoherently try to offer up some kind of an explanation, but I'm rambling gibberish. My mom, being short-tempered, says, "Just get your butt inside, there's nothing in there." I hesitantly did as I was told. When we got inside, she was not happy about the kitchen being a complete mess. My food was scattered all around the table and the floor. I didn't do that. I usually cleaned up after myself. I had no explanation and had given up on trying to explain what happened. I knew it would sound unbelievable anyways. I have no real explanation for this experience, even after decades of research into the paranormal. Perhaps it was my father's spirit, angry about the presence of another man in the house that he built, or when my friends and I found a Ouija board in the closet and asked it a couple of questions. That's another story for later. The visitor or something similar would return again soon. The scraping noises would also return a few more times over the years. It's really great to tell these events after all these years, so thanks to all those that are interested. This is my first story submission, and hopefully it gets through. I want everyone to listening to know that this story is 100% true, and I still occasionally think about it to this day. Back in the summer of 2018, I briefly dated a guy. Let's call him Zeke. It didn't last long though, maybe 2 to 3 months, and our relationship primarily ended due to distance. In that short time, Zeke had opened up to me about deep personal things. One of those very deep things was about his little brother who had passed away. Let's call him Nico. Nico was a weed smoker, which there's nothing wrong with that, but one day it did tragically cost his life. No, it wasn't because of the marijuana itself. His dealer, to Nico's oblivion, had given him weed that was laced with a heavy dose of fentanyl. He had smoked it, and everyone thought that he was just taking a nap. After no one could wake him up, he was rushed to the ER and pronounced brain dead at the hospital. They took him off life support that very evening. Nico was only 20, and this tragedy happened very quick, and Zeke and his sister, let's call her Emery, had no time to process it. Nico passed away in 2017, maybe 8 months before I had met Zeke, and at the time, Zeke and Emery were still, understandably, heavily mourning the loss of their brother. Aside from all the background stuff, here's where the story gets chilling. Throughout the duration of these 3 months, I probably drove the 7-hour trip to see Zeke 5 times, and stayed for maybe 4 days to a week at a time. So really, we were together in person for most of that short-lived relationship. It was summer and I wasn't working, but he was. And I didn't really mind the drive. I actually liked road trips. He was at his childhood home, and staying with his parents that summer, and I stayed at their house with him when I visited. One morning, Zeke was making breakfast in the kitchen downstairs, and I was hanging out upstairs in his room watching TV, when I suddenly kept getting phone calls from an unknown number. I brushed it off as a crazy scammer, but after multiple calls, I decided to answer on what was probably the 5th call. I hesitantly sighed and said, "Hello?" A muffled young male voice responded, "Hi." I responded, "Who is this?" Muffled, he responded, "Is this Dannah?" Before I answered anything, I asked, "Who is this?" His voice briefly became more clear. "I'll tell you if you can just confirm if you're Dannah or not," preceded by dial tone noises, static, and more screeching on the other end. I responded, "I'll tell you who I am if you can tell me first. You called me." Everything then got muffled again. I heard a sigh on the other end, followed by, "This is Nico. Is this Dannah?" Now, in my mind at that moment, a call from my boyfriend at the time's dead brother was the last logical reason on my mind. I honestly thought this was some random just trying to mess with me. I asked, "Nico who?" Again, he questioned, "Is this Dannah?" I hesitantly responded, "Yes, it is." I then heard a bunch of white noise and scratching noises. Through the white noise, he responded, "You know Zeke." I paused for what must have been 15 seconds. "You might have the wrong person." Which was kind of a stupid statement considering he knew my name, but I was nervous and I don't like random calls from restricted numbers. His voice echoed back, "I definitely don't." I nicely responded but firmly questioned, "Yes, I do know Zeke. How do you actually know him?" The voice, still heavily muffled, said, "He's my brother." And that's when it hit me. My heart sunk and I could feel my body go pale. My palms began sweating, and in my racing mind, all I could think of was, could it be? I took a deep breath and calmly said, "Nico, Zeke's only brother passed away last year." His voice echoed and I heard another loud screech. Yes, I did. "Just tell him that I miss him. I made it up safely." I said, "Whoever this isn't funny. It's messed up." He laughed in a warm, friendly way and said, "Red ball, closet." Before I could respond again, the line went silent and he hung up. I felt a bit intrusive with what I did next, but I had to know. So, I went into Nico's room, which the family had left intact, opened the closet door, and there on the floor was a red ball. My racing thoughts were confirmed, and I felt a bit dizzy after that. After Zeke was done making breakfast, I asked him if he could show me some old videos of Nico before actually telling him what had happened. And I told him that it was just out of curiosity because I never got to meet him. Zeke smiled and was more than glad to show me some videos. Well, during the first video, the next thing was officially confirmed. Nico's voice in that video was the exact same as the voice on the phone. I am 100% positive that I had a phone conversation with Zeke's dead brother. The red ball was just too much, and the voice, it was his voice. It turns out that I did meet Nico, just from the other side. This is a true story. I had to scroll all the way back through Facebook to 2010. I remember there were some pics from that evening, so I could find the date that this happened. So it was the 13th of April 2010. I used to work on Berwick Street, Soho, in a super cute little gift shop. Unfortunately, it closed down a few years ago, but it was such a cool place to work, and loads of celebrities used to pop in. That's another story. Most of my friends at the time lived or worked in the area, so there was usually something fun going on after I finished my shift, which was normally 7 p.m. One evening, 3 of my friends were in town, and we ended up heading to the courthouse London for dinner. If you walk down Canopy Street towards Liberty, London, the courthouse is just at the bottom, over the road. It's a pretty swish hotel with a bar and a restaurant, but it used to be a magistrate's court. It still has a lot of the original features, including the old jail cells, where you can have drinks, and the courtroom is the restaurant's seating area. Anyway, one of my friends had planned ahead and booked us a table, although when we turned up, there was only one other couple dining in there as far as I can remember. It was a weeknight, so it wasn't busy at all. We had dinner and chatted, etc. The night was just like any other night out for dinner. I'm not a big drinker, and I don't remember drinking at all, but if I did, it would have only have been a glass of wine, so I was in no way drunk. I excused myself, and I told my friends that I'm just popping into the bathroom and be back in a minute. And then off I went. So the layout may have changed. I haven't been there in many years, but at the time the bathroom layout was, there was a door you had to push, a short corridor, another door you had to push open, and then you were in the bathroom. Both doors were heavy and swung closed behind you once you'd gone through them. The bathroom was a smallish room, but nice as far as bathrooms go. There were 3 empty cubicles, all with the doors neatly open. I went into the right-hand side toilet and closed the door. As I sat using the toilet, sorry, I know, I began to hear what sounded like whispering behind me. Behind and perhaps just off to the right. It made me turn around, but I just thought to myself it must be something coming from the room next door. The whispering continued, but I couldn't really make out what was being said. Surprisingly, I was chill and didn't think anything of it. It was just someone in the room next door, right? The next thing was knock, knock, knock. 3 pretty loud knocks rapped on my toilet door. Now, in my confused mind, I thought one of my friends must have come into the bathroom and decided to knock on my door for some strange reason. I was finished using the toilet and I opened the door, expecting to see my friend, or someone, but there was no one there. The room was completely empty with all the cubicles just as they were when I entered, with the doors still open. There was absolutely nobody in the room with me. Plus, if someone had come in, knocked on my door, and then ran out again, I would have heard the door and footsteps. But there was nothing, just silence. And why would someone do that anyways? The hotel is pretty fancy. They wouldn't just let people run amok in it. So, at this point, I was puzzled, but still surprisingly chill. I think my mind just went to a rational place at the time. But the whispering? What was that about? I returned to my table and asked my friends if they'd knocked on my toilet door, and they all said no. They were kind of freaked out and didn't want to use the bathroom alone after that, which I guess is understandable. All of their reactions actually made me freak out a bit too. Did I just experience something paranormal? I can't explain it, but I definitely didn't imagine it. This is definitely a head scratcher for me. I often think about it and what the heck it was all about. I'll never know who or what knocked on my door and why they were whispering to me. I wonder what they were trying to tell me. Was it a ghost? I guess I'll never know. If you do ever visit London, you should pop in there. The bar is cool and they also do have a lovely afternoon tea. Just beware if you go to the bathroom alone. I have a paranormal experience that I would like to share. It happened to me about a month after my son was born. I want to give a little background that is important to my story. I'll keep it short and paraphrase as much as possible. My son was born 5 weeks early via C-section due to complications. He was a tiny thing, only weighing 4 pounds. Despite this, he only spent 9 days in the NICU. When he came home from the hospital, my dear mother-in-law stayed with us to help us, as he was our first child, and we were very nervous about taking care of a tiny baby. My mother-in-law had experience with premature babies, since my husband, her first baby, was also born 5 or 6 weeks early and was a tiny baby too. Throughout the 3 weeks that she was with us, she would tell me that she thought my late mother was around. She could feel a benevolent spirit around. My mother passed when I was 14 years old, so it was possible. As a pagan, I believe in the paranormal, and this wasn't my first paranormal experience. On to the actual story. After my mother-in-law left, I was pretty well left alone as my husband had gone back to work a week earlier. I was left to navigate parenthood with a tiny baby, all on my own. My son had long fingernails and was always scratching his face. I would put the baby mittens on his tiny hands, only to have them fall off every time he moved because they were just too big for his teeny tiny hands. I decided that I needed to get some baby nail clippers, so I went to the store and bought a baby nail care set that had not just nail clippers, but also had a nail file and some baby mittens, which miraculously fit his teeny tiny baby hands and actually stayed on even when he moved them. Sorry if I'm losing you, but all this is important to the actual experience, which I promise is coming up. So, for a week, I had the little mittens on his hands so he wouldn't scratch his face. I was scared to clip his nails because his hands were just so tiny. One day after bathing him and getting him dressed, I went to grab the little mittens to put on his hand, and one was missing. I looked all over the house for it, and I couldn't find it. I was way too tired to worry about it due to lack of sleep from being a new parent, so I didn't tear the house apart or anything like that. I'm one of those people who believes that missing things will show up when you forget you're looking for it. And they always seem to for me. That night, after feeding my son, putting him down in his bassinet to sleep, I laid down on the couch and I went to sleep as well. I had a dream that started out dark, but then there was this warm light that revealed a person. Usually in dreams, I don't actually see people's faces, but this person's face was very defined. It looked like my mother's. In the dream, she held up what looked like a little white mitten just like the one I lost. And she smiled as she carefully placed the mitten in my hand. Before I knew it, she was gone. I woke up pretty much immediately afterwards and remembered the dream very vividly. I could feel something in the hand that was hanging over the side of the couch. I closed my hand and I felt the item. I realized that it was the little mitten like in my dream, and I threw it across the room because I freaked out a bit. I could hardly believe it. Did my mother actually come to me in a dream and tell me that she found the mitten? After I calmed down a bit, I stood up and walked over and picked it up and looked it over. What I forgot to mention is that I had accidentally spilled something black on the missing mitten a few days before, so after examining the mitten, I realized that it was the one that I had been missing. It had the black spots on it. But just to make sure, I went to the drawer where I had put the other little white mitten, which was still pure white and had nothing black on it, and it was still there. So, apparently, if I were to guess, according to my dream, my mother found the mitten for me and wanted to make sure that it was returned so I could have it to keep my son from hurting his face. I know a lot of you are going to call BS on this, but it 100% happened, and it still freaks me out a bit to this day. This isn't the first paranormal experience that I've had, and it probably won't be the last. If you like this one, I'll be happy to share more stories in the future. When I was 4 or 5, I remember my father telling me this story. There was this gnarly dead tree that was the third tree from the left of one of our gates between the two fields. My dad said that when he was a kid, he and his brother had been out in the woods when they saw a fire in the distance. Being young boys in the early 50s, they went to see what it was. Now, the story he told was that when they came out of one set of woods, they saw a large bonfire near the tree, and what appeared to be 3 women dancing around it. They thought it was a party or some crazy paganism. Now, this next part of the story is hard for me to remember. It went one of a few ways. Either 3 orbs of fire ascended out of the fire and began winding around the tree, or the women turned into orbs and flew around the tree. Or the women just began flying and the orbs were something else that I can't remember. But my dad and uncle immediately started running back to the farm. And I think he said that whatever was flying was moving in their direction, but I don't think it was quite giving chase. They went out there days later, and there was evidence of a bonfire. Here's the creepy part to me. As a kid, I was afraid of this dead tree because of the story. Most of our dead trees fall at some point, just from internal rot after not being sustained. But this tree, several years ago, sprouted leaves and is now a full tree. It's not something I could miss because, like I said, it's by a gate and you just count 3 trees over. It's not some tree out in the middle of the woods with a bunch of other trees. I asked my dad about the story after I noticed the tree growing leaves. He kind of chuckled, but more like a nervous chuckle. So I don't know if he is just playing a decades-long joke or what. Unfortunately, now he has brain damage from multiple strokes, and though I want to ask him again, his memory can't really be trusted as to whether he would remember if the story was a joke, just a scary story to tell his son, whether it really happened and he can't remember, or whether it didn't really happen but his brain would trick him into believing that it did. It's crazy, because even though his story sounds made up, the dead tree blooming always unnerved me. Every time I open that gate, even now in my 30s, my eyes are fixed on it like I expect something to happen. To avoid any confusion, I'm non-binary, AFAB, and I'm now 16, and during the event, I was 14. I was at school, but I went to the nurse because I wasn't feeling good mentally and physically. They sent me home, so I left school and headed home. I always take the bus home and was craving some energy drinks. Usually I go to the bus stop in front of my school, but since I wanted an energy drink, I went to one a little further. So I buy my drink and wait at the bus stop when a car pulls in. He asks me if I needed a ride, and I of course said no, but he kept pushing it, like, come on, just get in. I once again say no, while my whole body is shaking. He asked me some other things too, like, where are you from? How old are you? I didn't answer those questions. Right then, the car passed. I just started looking at the other people who were also waiting on the bus to see if they were okay to then see the car just going to another girl, who was also waiting at the bus stop. She did the same thing as me. At the end, he drives off and I call my mom to tell her what happened. The call went like this. Me. Hey, Mom. Hey, what's wrong? Some guy just asked me to take a ride, but he's gone now. I just want to talk for a bit because I'm stressing out. Did you check the license plate? Oh, damn it. I forgot to. I'm sorry. I was just so scared, but my bus just arrived, so I'll see you at home. I got home safely, and I'm so glad that I did. Ever since this event, I feel unsafe at all times, except for when I'm home. I think about this often. What could have happened? Maybe he did actually want to bring me home, but I doubt that. To this day, I still think about how I could have been human trafficked, or kidnapped, or maybe even killed, and it'll forever haunt me. So this, my friends, was a collection of creepy Reddit and subscriber stories. The thumbnail says Reddit stories. The title is Reddit and subscriber stories because it's a mix of both, you see. And that's too much text to put on a thumbnail for me, so Reddit stories is what I call this collection, this series, I guess. So hopefully you all are okay with that, especially the people who submitted the stories. And a huge thank you to everybody who did submit their story, and a huge thank you to everyone who listens, and listened, and will listen, and doesn't listen. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting that thumbs up button. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. Leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts or which one was your favorite. And if you want to support further, you can go to my Patreon page or hit join down below, where for $1 a month you can get early access to content like this, as well as content that is nothing like this. Content that's so vastly different, it's like comparing memory foam to San Francisco. Yeah, that was a throwback for those of you who've been around for a while. Anyways, I hope you all have a beautiful day. I hope I'll see you on the next video. I'm running horribly late. It's 3:30. This video needs to be up about 2 hours ago so it can be ready by 5:30. Oh, jeez. Anyways, love y'all. Have a great day. See you on the next video. But until then, sleep well.